You know, I think we sensed something during the presidency because she had legitimate pain from several pinched nerves, and she was getting medication for that. And what we didn't know is that the combination of, you know, alcohol and those pain medications produced that cocktail that at times took away some of her sharpness and those kind of things. And slowly, over months and months and months, she developed a melancholy and eventually turned into depression and pulled back from life, you know, started canceling appointments and not showing up, sleeping in late, slurred speech, all those things. But that takes months. And we didn't know what we were looking at. I mean, we were like millions of other families that, what's wrong with mom? There was not the education about alcoholism and drug dependency that there is now. So Dad led that intervention, and you know, my memory of that is very clear. We walked in the door that morning, all the kids, and Dad surprised Mom, and he took her hand and said, "Betty, we're here because we love you. You know, the kids want their mother back. I want my wife back." And those interventions are tough. I mean, that is tough, hard work. A lot of tears, a lot of crying, a lot of raised voices, a lot of hugs, and then more raised voices, and denial and not denial. And, I mean, it goes back and forth. It's a tug of war. And Dad just never gave up. He kept holding her hand and said, "Betty, we love you. Trust us." And we woke her up. She did the work.
So the next thing you know, April of 1978, she's being admitted to Long Beach Naval Hospital for the treatment of pill addiction and alcoholism. It was shocking to people. Here, less than a year and a half from the White House, she's being admitted. But like her candor with her breast cancer when she was in the White House, she was equally candid about this, and so actually did a press release that she was going into a hospital for the treatment of alcoholism and drug addiction. The reaction was shock and surprise, because still, in many people's minds, alcoholism and drug addiction was primarily a homeless issue. It was people that really had nothing in their life. And how could the former First Lady be an alcoholic? Mrs. Ford herself, when she started going out talking about this, she would very upfront say, many people's image of a woman alcoholic is a slut. And she would use that word, somewhat to shock people, but that's what people felt. It was like no respectable woman could have an addiction to alcohol or other drugs. And Betty was trying to change it. Betty said, this is not a drug that has any particular socioeconomic, it affects everyone. And it's just as much in the halls of corporate America as it is in the homeless. And it's interesting that her public announcement of this, and her then doing so well as a recovering alcoholic woman, it really changed the way people thought about this. Part of the beautiful thing about Mrs. Ford in the early years, and then as the center continued to develop, was she knew what she didn't know. So she never pretended to be a counselor or a physician or something that she was not. What she was a recovering alcoholic and addict, a woman who embraced her recovery. Every month she came and spoke to the entire patient population during one of our lectures. And we have presentations, lectures every day. And she would always open up her presentation to the patient saying, "I'm Betty, and I'm a very grateful, recovering alcoholic and addict." And that's how she was, and it would put the patients at ease. So she knew, she never got into roles that were not things she should do. Where she had one-on-one was a counselor would call me and say, "John, there's a woman from Atlanta who comes from a fairly wealthy background. She's been here 3 days and she really doesn't know if she needs to be here and whether she's going to fit into this program. Would Mrs. Ford have time this afternoon to sit and have an iced tea and talk to this woman from Atlanta?" Well, Betty loved that. And she wasn't trying to be a counselor. She just sat as a fellow woman and sat and talked with her. And she loved that. She'd come at lunchtime and go sit with a group of patients at their table. And they would always look and like, holy cow, that's Mrs. Ford. But she would just sit and talk with them. I'm one of you. I'm just like you. And it put people at ease. There was a group of women that when they were in treatment ordered t-shirts that said Camp Betty. And they gave one to her, and she loved it. It says a lot that patients, when she was with them, didn't call her Mrs. Ford. They called her Betty. The Betty Ford Center has had a reputation of being exclusive and being for the rich and famous, and it really is not the reality of the 100,000 patients that have been through. A typical patient, the age is all over the place, but would be in their 40s, would be a man or a woman who still has a family, or maybe because of their addiction has been divorced and is estranged a little from their family. Most of them are still employed, although often the employer is part of the reason they're here because they've been missing work. So really, it's very much a cross-section of America and a cross-section of kind of middle-class America. Now, some people are wealthier than that or have had lives that are somewhere in the public, but that's a very, very small percentage of people that come here. Part of the reason for that is we take this very seriously, because once you come to the center, you're here for a minimum of 30 days, most likely longer, and you're not going to be leaving. So what happens because of that is you get people that are more serious about treatment. President Ford and people that knew President and Betty, and especially around the Coachella Valley, because they loved their part of the year where they were here, had an incredible relationship, and they supported each other so much. And I described it as when it came to the Betty Ford Center, President Ford was a half step behind her. He wanted this to be her thing. So he never took a leadership role. He did not want to go on the board of directors here. He said, that's Betty. Betty's, but he was always in the background, raising money, supporting her. When our financial statements or our audited statements would come out, she would take them home and say, here, honey, look at these, and then you can explain them to me. And they had that kind of relationship. But actually in 2007, which was a year after President Ford died, he died in December of 2006, and about a year after that, she made a personal decision because of her health to kind of back off a little bit. Again, we've described here a woman who was here 1, 2, 3 days a week throughout the year. This was her place. But health-wise and really the grief over President Ford dying, she decided to step away a little bit. And so in many ways, the history of the Betty Ford Center is the first 25 years of Betty and her legacy and her being the leader, and then what's happened since. And so those of us that are here, we talk all the time about how do we keep Betty's legacy alive? How do we keep her dream, what she wanted here, alive? And those of us who were here and worked at her side, how do we make sure we pass that on to the future people that are working here? In the later years, I remember walking this campus with Betty, and she was truly overwhelmed at what her campus had become, and that we had 190 beds, and we served all these hundreds of people every day of the year. And she would say to me, John, I hope people don't think this was about me. Because she said it wasn't. She said, this isn't about me. It's so much bigger than that.